Hello and welcome to Epiphytic Cacti. Today we're going to take a look at Weberocereus tunilla subspecies Biolleyi. Now, this kind of has an interesting history because when it was very first discovered, it was classified as a Rhipsalis, which obviously these are not the flowers of a Rhipsalis, but it didn't take very long before it was moved to the genus Weberocereus, and it really has not moved since. And that was well over 100 years ago that it was moved to the genus Weberocereus. What's really funny about that is a friend and I, we both collect Weberocereus, and so we were laughing about Weberocereus tunilla subspecies Biolleyi because if it wasn't for the flowers, it really does look like a Rhipsalis. You would think that it was one, so hence that's kind of why I'm sure it was classified as a Rhipsalis for a little while. According to IUNCRedlist.org, Weberocereus tunilla's endangered status is least concern. I do want to say that they really are not making any kind of distinction between Weberocereus tunilla subspecies tunilla and subspecies Biolleyi, so I can't really say if there's a difference. According to the assessment, it says Weberocereus tunilla is listed as least concern because it has a very wide distribution, is locally common, and existing threats are not causing significant declines. It grows in Costa Rica. This actually says Costa Rica, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Panama. I'm not entirely sure about the subspecies. I've only ever seen subspecies Biolleyi listed as growing in Costa Rica. So I'm not sure if it actually does grow in Honduras, Nicaragua, and Panama, or if that's actually subspecies tunilla. It says the species inhabits lowland and montane wet forests. It's pollinated by glossophagine bats. The main threats to this species are the expansion of tourist development in coastal areas and the expansion of agro-industry, especially pineapples and coffee at higher elevations. So if you're anything like me, you're probably a little bit curious, and so I was curious about these glossophagine bats. So I looked them up and I found this really interesting article on ScienceDirect.com, but specifically in this article, there was these really cool pictures of one of these bats feeding on banana flowers. So here you can kind of see the bat is up there feeding, and they're nectar feeding bats and have these rather long brush-like tongues that they insert into the flower and eat the nectar. And so here we can actually see one with its very long tongue, and he is definitely having the time of his life. Look at all of the pollen on his face. He just has this little pollen beard. It's absolutely fabulous. So I'm going to assume that something about the iridescence of these flowers and the scent attracts these nocturnal pollinators. And so this particular flower, it has a scent, and most people describe it as unpleasant. Most people do not like the smell of this. I have read article after article after article, or post after post after post describing the scent as being off-putting or unpleasant. Personally, I do not find that to be true, and it's not the kind of scent that like really fills a room. You really have to put your nose in the flower to smell it, but to me, it mostly smells like some kind of raw melon, like maybe cucumber or watermelon, mixed with raw pumpkin. Like, during the holidays, during Halloween, when you're carving your pumpkin, that scent mixed with like melony scent. And so I think that if a person really doesn't like the smell of that, like I can see people disliking the smell of raw pumpkin quite a bit. So I think that would be where a lot of people probably find it off-putting. I personally just find it to be a little bit odd. I kind of like the smell, mostly because I think it smells kind of like some facial products, like some melony kind of facial products. So it's just kind of a strange scent, but apparently the nocturnal pollinators must find that scent attractive. So here we can see a place where this might actually grow. So this is Totiguero in Costa Rica. It is literally right off of the Caribbean coast. If we check climate maps, it'll give us an idea of, in general, what the climate is like in this place. Even if you go to Wikipedia, it basically tells you that Totiguero is a village in the northern Caribbean coast of Costa Rica in the Limon province. It's a small village which can only be reached by boat or airplane. It says Tortuguero has a very wet, tropical rainforest climate with heavy to very heavy rainfall year-round. If we look here, we can see temperatures and we get the average day and night temperatures. And so you're looking at, on the high end, somewhere around 30 degrees Celsius to 28 degrees Celsius, which is 86 degrees Fahrenheit to 82 degrees Fahrenheit. So pretty warm. And then if we look on the colder side of things, we see 23 degrees Celsius to about 25 degrees Celsius, which is really about 73.4 degrees Fahrenheit to 77 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, still pretty warm. So we're looking at a very mild climate. There's not a lot of huge fluctuations in the actual temperatures there. Now, if we look at precipitation, this is one of these things which gets a little bit weird because I feel like a lot of times you hear people talk about like the dry season, and the dry season in a tropical climate is not really as dry as you think. So here we can see the general amount of precipitation. We can see that it probably rains the least in the month of March there. It's a little over 100 millimeters worth of rain, which is somewhere over 4 inches of rain in that month. Then if we go to something like July, which is the most amount of rain, we're looking at maybe 450 millimeters of rain in that month. And that's 17.7 inches. To put that in perspective, I live in Duluth, Minnesota. And in the springtime here, the average amount of rainfall that we get is about 6.7 inches. I'm like air quoting dry season right now because it's more like the dry season is like most people's spring. The wet season is basically like extremely, extremely wet. So now if I look at the monthly rainy days, so even again, we look at March, which again is like probably the driest month. There's 8 days worth of rain. 8 days where it actually rains. Again, it's like springtime here. And then if we turn around and we look at that like really wet season, we see that it's raining 23 days out of a month. That is incredible. That is a lot of rain. So now if we look at another place where this might grow, again, this is the Veragua rainforest in Costa Rica. You can actually see in the map pictures that just absolutely looks like freaking paradise. Again, here we see a similar kind of thing. The temperatures might be a little bit cooler, ranging from about 80, and then the lows being about 65. And then we see the rainfall inches. If we look again, we can see that like February, March, September, October seem to have had less rainfall. Again, those are like my spring here in Duluth. And then if we look at daylight hours, you can see that consistently, again, very close to the equator. So daylight hours consistently at about 11.5 to 12.5 hours per day. So that just really gives us a really good, clear idea of the climate that this particular species grows in. It grows right alongside your philodendron, monstera, anthuriums, ferns, bromeliads, orchids, a whole bunch of your epiphytic cacti really just grow right alongside all of those different type of genera. So it's not that mysterious really. However, it's going to be one of those species, though, that is definitely going to appreciate high humidity levels. So growing it in like a greenhouse cabinet like I was doing is probably ideal. I keep this inside of the greenhouse cabinet with my Strophocactus whittii, which is, you can see in the background, it's basically like this ever-growing moss plank wall thing that I have going on in there. And because I water that, the humidity level in that particular cabinet is higher than it is in my other cabinets generally, except for, of course, the terrarium cabinet. But the humidity levels are anywhere from about 60 up to like 85 or something like that. So it does really, really well in there. It is extremely fast growing. I actually just got one cutting of this back in the fall of last year, and it has just grown and grown and grown. It's just absolutely fabulous. And it hasn't just been that way for me. It has also been that way for a friend of mine who grows overseas as well in Hungary. He grows his, I think, in a grow tent. So we have kind of similar growing environments. The difference between us a little bit is that I'm actually a chronic overwaterer. I think we kind of discovered that this species does not like to dry out. So it will bloom. I was right in my assessment, I think, whenever I saw it flower for the first time. And then it still had all these kind of like pre-buds at the areoles. So it produced some flowers, took a very short break, started growing some more, and then more of those pre-buds started forming flowers. At one time the second time it had 13 buds on it, 5 of them aborted, and 8 of the flowers are actually going to make it to full flowering. And so it can apparently continuously do this in like these short bursts of flowers. So even though the flowers really only last one night, it is more of a continuous kind of flowering thing with like short breaks in between. So it's not quite as sad as some of the night flowering species can be, where you know, it's just like one big burst of flowers and they're just kind of done. The other thing that I think is something that should be done with this species, that it should be fed year-round, low doses, because of the fact that it is continuously growing and continuously flowering. I'm sure you can take a break maybe in that little bit of the dry season, but you know, mine's flowering right now, and it's been actively growing the entire time that I've had it outside in the spring and all throughout the whole entire winter. It's done just fabulous. This one is epiphytic, generally will grow in the tree canopies and just hang down. And I've seen pictures of this be absolutely magnificent, giant monster plants with just hundreds of flowers. So it makes a very, very impressive plant eventually. I happen to have 2 clones of this plant, and one of them, this one, does very, very well. And the other one that I've had for several years. It has never flowered. It barely grows. It's really kind of tragic. And it seems to be doing a little bit better now that I put it in one of the cabinets, but it also does not actually seem to like as much water. And this particular one, the branches seem to be consistently round thus far, whereas the other one, the branches are kind of roundish. Sometimes they're flat. So they do seem to be a little bit different in a way, which is kind of curious. So here you can see the buds. The buds, they always kind of look like plastic to me. They're very shiny. It's hard to describe because they're kind of shiny and thick. Like it just seems almost fake, like they're made out of plastic. This particular species has really cool buds in the fact that it has like those little pre-petals that are on the sort of flower tube that curl. They're absolutely just the coolest thing ever. And they can be so curly, and it adds this just beautiful kind of thing to the flower bud and the flower. It's probably my favorite part. I think one of the very surprising things to me was, it's not that the flower is colorful, it's that it has really beautiful transitions in colors. So, you know, from the tube part of the flower being that kind of very bright kind of greenish color, to then going into the outer petals, which are a little bit kind of a yellowish, and then it goes into the next layer of petals where it has this kind of soft pink, and all the petals are kind of transparent, but they have like a sheen to them, like an iridescent kind of sheen. It's the same thing that all the Weberocereus has, which makes the flowers just really stand out. It's absolutely beautiful. So then the next row of petals, like when you get into the flower, is actually more white. Like all the Weberocereus, it is chock full of stamen and just loaded with pollen. It has so much pollen. It's just like, I can just imagine one of those bats sticking their face in there, and you can imagine how it would have to like really put its face in there to get its tongue down into the nectar here, down into that tube. And I bet its whole face is just so heavily loaded with pollen when it finally comes out. Really interesting to me how these plants and how flowers would have actually evolved to sort of maximize the fact that these pollinators are going to get as much pollen as possible on them. So it's just really crazy. And in some of these pictures, you can kind of sort of see, maybe not here, but the plant does form aerial roots kind of up and down. So I believe that in nature, not only does this one grow in the trees, but it will actually climb up the trees to basically find better positioning. And so you can see just how long this is here. It is just a really long plant. Again, no wonder why it was confused with Rupsalis. It's very, very long. I just love these flowers. I love that combination of colors. The plant, the brighter the light, it will flush red. The branches will produce those betulins, and you can see that they'll turn red. There you can kind of see those pre-buds at the areoles. So again, it wouldn't surprise me if it flowers now, takes a little bit of a break, and then more flower buds start to come out of those areoles. I was kind of excited when I found that out. I really want to try to hybridize the Weberocereus with each other, but I didn't really know. I was like, shoot, if it blooms like the other ones, I'm probably not going to be able to get any pollen. So maybe I can collect some of the pollen and freeze it and see if I can't do something with it, I guess. It is definitely one of my absolute favorite epiphytic cacti. Weberocereus as a whole, all of the whole entire genus, it's like just one of my absolute favorites. It probably is my favorite. I think just because in one genus you only have a handful of species, but their morphological differences is just absolutely crazy interesting. I just love everything about Weberocereus. But I hope that you've enjoyed looking at Weberocereus Tunilla subspecies Biolleyi with me. Thank you for watching, and as always, happy cacti growing.